right, it's 1 o'clock. Time to get down to business. I will call the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee to order on Monday, December 9. Today we acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. We are thankful to share in the special spirit of this place, rich in the energy of Mother Earth, our ancestors, and the love of all creation. I'll look to the Deputy Mayor for the adoption of the agenda, and the motion is that the content of the Strategic Initiatives Standing Committee agenda for December 9, 2019 be adopted as amended.
Mayor Saunderson, so moved.
Seconder, Councillor Jeffrey, all in favor? That is carried. Declarations of pecuniary interest. Any declarations around the table? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we get through the agenda, let me know. Deputations, we have none. Staff reports. 5.1, proposed water and wastewater rates presentation. I believe we have Andrew Rabella here from Hemson Consulting Limited. Welcome, Mr. Rabella.
Good afternoon. Thanks very much for having me. Again, my name is Andrew Mirabella, Senior Consultant at Hemson. I've been working quite closely with town staff for the last several months to come to the point here where we've have some revised analysis for you in terms of the rate setting study. We were here before you about a month ago to discuss kind of the kickoff of the project, what the type of things we were analyzing, and we covered a lot of ground at that particular meeting itself. So I won't be going through all that specific information that we did at that particular time. We'll just kind of focus on the actual rate and rate results and kind of what we've looked at. This meeting, I know you have quite a busy day ahead of you here, so we'll try to keep this as condensed as possible, and we'll obviously answer questions at the end for any clarification. So just to give a bit of an overview, we again talked about this in terms of what we're doing, the study background. You know, obviously the town itself has been fiscally prudent in the management of your water and wastewater services. We've undertaken quite regular utility rate reviews to ensure that your revenues are matching your expenditures. You know, the last study itself was done about 5-6 years ago, and that really kind of coincides with this 5-year update. With that said, throughout that period, significant growth has taken place. Different things have occurred in terms of even capital costs, so it's promptly time to do this type of study. And with that, we are analyzing kind of where to go in terms of your rate structure and making sure that we can manage all that infrastructure, manage your revenues and your costs on a go-forward basis with the proper structure in mind. So just to give a bit of an overview here in terms of what we were looking at in terms of our objectives, again, talked a bit about this at length in our last meeting. We're here obviously to, in addition to providing a cost recovery analysis, we are doing a rate structure review. So examining the relationship between your fixed costs as well as your variable costs, evaluating those existing pricing structures and look at any alternatives that may exist. While looking at all those alternatives, there's obviously a lot of competing factors which you have to consider in terms of conservation efforts, equity, administration, making sure the rates itself are transparent and easy for the end users to understand. And those are the types of things that we consider in the development of our rate analysis here. We've done the model and calculated the rates over a 10-year period, and again looking at ensuring the full operational costs and capital expenditures that are required to service that system are funded through the utility rates themselves. The actual analysis itself, we've done a sensitivity test to see what the calculation looks like on both your residential and your non-residential users in the town, and what those impacts look like for those variety of customers under the rate structures. So just as a kind of a benchmark here in terms of the backbone of the analysis, when we took an assessment of the overall utility operations, what it looked like, a couple things that we saw, which kind of is the fundamental basis for how we managed and made informed decisions about the rate structure that we're proposing with staff. Effectively, generally right now, you generate about 75% of your total rate revenue from the fixed charges. So not much of your rates itself are related to the variable component, which is based on consumption. So the majority of what one pays at the end user is largely fixed, and whether they save water or conserve water or not, a big portion of that bill is constant. So that's something that we're looking at to adjust in the going forward basis. The second point is you're in a very strong fiscal standing to start 2019. Your water reserves and wastewater reserves are quite healthy, and that means you have sufficient funds to fund operations, and you're putting money away into reserves on an ongoing basis. Since the last rate study itself, you've really advanced your asset management program and developed kind of a robust 10-year capital plan. So you have a very good understanding of the infrastructure requirements that you need over the next coming years in order to manage your system both from a growth and non-growth perspective. growth study side is obviously covered from development charges, but their shares of those projects would need to be funded from the rates, and we've taken that into consideration. That's part of the overall 10-year capital plan. So it's a pretty good news story here for the town of Collingwood in terms of the way your utility rate operations run and the way the assessment of it from that standpoint. So in terms of the rate structure and the rate structure review that we've done and what we've considered a new study, we talked a lot about the last one, what different alternatives are out there. And we've effectively done 3 different options. Option 1 is is one option, but contained with many sub-options within it. So just to give an overview here of the multiple scenarios that we've done, we've adjusted the fixed versus variable cost recovery under several different kind of scenarios, assuming the same rate structure is in place. You have your fixed charges and then you have your variable rates. But we've changed the cost recovery from around that 75%, which I spoke to. We've adjusted it downwards under a scenario of 60% fixed and 40% variable. And we've even adjusted for the ones even further than that, 50% fixed and 40% fixed. So we did a bit of a sliding scale in terms of the relationship and changing that cost recovery structure. What we have in the next 2 columns is the impact on both your residential and your non-residential users. So just under that option 1, effectively, the more we shift to your variable rates, your low volume users are going to see the benefit where their bills are actually going to decrease because now they're paying more relative to the actual water that they're consuming. Your non-residential impact in the short story will see kind of low volume users which have a similar residential type volume use on the non-residential side will see a decrease, but for the majority, those customers, especially your large volume customers, are going to see upward increases around 50%. More of their charge is now weighted to how much volume they use, so it certainly has a direct relationship to what their total end bill is. And that relationship and that percentage increase that I'm talking about, upwards of 50%, will only increase as we continue to shift more costs to your variable rate recovery. On option 2, what we're looking at is 60% fixed and 40% variable. What we're doing here is because the town is in a fairly good fiscal standing, we're actually looking at a sewer rate reduction. So we're actually going to be decreasing the rates from what you currently have in place as an effort because we're to manage our reserve funds. We've identified a threshold, and we'll talk about that in the coming slides. But we're actually being able to leverage a bit of a sewer rate reduction because we have good reserve fund on hand and we know exactly what our capital requirements are on a go-forward basis. And certainly, even with that, when we talk about a sewer rate reduction, certainly on the residential side, your costs for low volume users as well as your high volume users are actually going to decrease from your current position. For the non-residential side, even though we are implementing a sewer rate reduction on your current bill, your actual town high volume water users are still going to see increases upwards of around 20%. And that's largely, again, because the shift from what your current fixed cost recovery is to your variable rate. And that shift itself isn't enough, or the sewer rate reduction isn't enough to offset that change in cost recovery relationship. And option 3 is a bit of a hybrid between number 2 and kind of bringing in a bunch of factors, and that's really the kind of the recommended approach and what we're seeing as the preferred scenario here. So it's a 60% variable fixed fee and 40% variable. 60% of costs are going to be recovered from your fixed and 40% from your variable rate. We still include a sewer rate reduction, but we actually move to a humpback rate structure, which is in addition to option 2. And that humpback rate structure means that your water variable rates are going to increase under each tier structure up into a certain point, and then it'll actually retreat to a lower volume charge in that 4th tier. And that 4th tier is where your non-residential customers, your big ones at least, are going to be falling into. So what that does is on the residential side, it's a very low or minimal impact for your high volume users. Residentially, your low volume users are still going to see a decrease. We're going to quantify what those decreases are in the coming slides. And our cost for low volume non-residential impacts is going to be decreased as well. But your cost for the town's high volume users, although they're going to be increasing, it's still mitigated substantially from relative to options 1 and 2. And I'll show you what that spectrum is on a sample size of users in the next coming slide. So it is kind of if we want to promote conservation and move towards that continuum, this approach, at least here, mitigates kind of all the different competing interests of the different user classes across the town. So specifically, what 3 adjustments are we doing? First one being our sewer rates in particular are being reduced to reflect the good fiscal standing of your system. We're going to continue to maintain fiscal sustainability of your operations over the long term. Second point is the fixed versus variable rates. We're going to increase the variable rate cost recovery as an offsetting of reducing the fixed fee component. So our fixed charge per month will actually go down, but the charge per cubic meter will actually be going up. So we're still going to be recovering the same amount of money under either scenario. It's just the way we recover the money is going to be different. And it's a matter of changing the way the end users are charged for that. So we're going to be moving from approximately 75% fixed charges to 60% fixed. And the consumption charge, again, we're going to be eliminating that summer surcharge, and we're going to be incorporating that humpback rate structure applied. And that's going to be to all system users, both residentially and non-residential. So it's going to be a uniform consumption charge applied for each tier. So thinking about those tier structures and establishing them in terms of the humpback structure, so it's going to be a 4-tier system. The thresholds are all established along the side, moving from 0 to 8 cubic meters, and then your 4th tier will be anything above 150 cubic meters per month. The table there shows the distribution of where flow will occur in each of those different tiers. Residential is in blue, non-residential commercial is in red. You'll see that most of your residential flow or bill consumption will fall into tiers 1 and tier 2. Non-residentially or commercial, most of the consumption is actually going to be falling in that 4th tier. And that 4th tier, again, under the humpback rate structure, will be the lowest consumption component charge. So it's a reduced charge from your tier 1, giving the benefits to those higher volume non-residential water users. And one thing that's important about the way we structure the tier, and my last point on this slide, is that when we're doing a rate structure, we want to make sure that we're not encouraging residential water use in the 4th tier to get a lower rate. So we've set the tier high enough that residential water flow won't be falling into that 4th tier. So they are going to be paying on the increasing or inclining block structure to kind of encourage water conservation efforts. So just as a summary in terms of the fixed fee, in terms of our rate structure, option 3 that we're talking about here, it's still going to be levied 2 components. You have a fixed fee, and similar to the way you currently charge, it's going to be levied regardless of the amount of water consumed. The fee will continue to be differentiated by meter size, and the fixed fee will be set to recover approximately 60% of your total rate required revenues and rate funded costs. The second component, in addition to your fixed fee, will be your consumption rate, again levied on that humpback block rate structure. 4 tiers, where your first 3 tiers are going to increase on a charge per cubic meter basis, and your 4th tier will be the lowest charge and set at a discounted rate from your block 1 or your first tier. And that consumption component is set to recover 40% of the total cost, which is again a departure from your current 75-25 split. So just a kind of bit of a summary here in terms of some of the rationale in terms of the sewer rate reduction, just to give a bit of an overview in terms of your reserve funds, where they currently sit. Right now, relative to, you have a replacement value of about $300 million in terms of estimated at 2019. Reserve funds sit at about $25.5 million, so just under 10% of your reserve funds as a percentage of your replacement value. So what we're doing in terms of the analysis here and how we're making sure that we're ensuring fiscal sustainability, we're kind of looking at setting a minimum reserve fund balance. So even with the sewer rate reduction, we want to keep into consideration 2 distinct components. One, that the town has sufficient reserves on hand for capital asset replacement. So looking at the total capital asset value of your infrastructure, water and wastewater combined, we want to maintain at least 4% of the asset replacement cost in your reserve fund. In addition to that, we're looking at operational and stabilization reserve funds. So maintaining at least 6 months worth of operational expenditures in your reserve fund to cover any offset revenues or any shortfalls that may occur throughout the year. You can always draw upon those funds to pay for any of those shortfalls. So those 2 components combined is how we're establishing a bit of a minimum ceiling that we want to ensure that we're going to incur over the 10-year forecast period of the analysis. And we'll see what that looks like with the rates that we calculated relative to that 4% reserve going forward. So just in terms of the cost setting analysis and our rate setting approach, as I mentioned, it's really a full cost recovery analysis, so we want to ensure that we're recovering the full operational cost, our capital cost, and then we're also putting away some money in reserve funds for the future asset repair and replacement of your existing infrastructure. Operationally, we've taken your 2019 and 2020 draft budgets, adjusted them to account for the effects of inflation for various cost center levels on a go-forward basis. Your capital needs and capital requirements identified by 2 distinct things. You have a 10-year capital plan in place right now. At least the forecast, we've utilized that capital plan, 10-year capital plan, and incorporated it in. We looked at the town's development charge study, which Hempstead recently completed, any of the non-growth shares of infrastructure that's required to fund growth-related capital projects, we've incorporated that in, so we are ensuring that sufficient funds are available to fund both those components. The provision for asset replacement, based on that $300 million worth of infrastructure that you currently have, there are going to be requirements over the years in order to sustain that infrastructure, in addition, or perhaps maybe in addition to the capital projects that we've already identified. So ensuring that we continue to put some money away into reserves is fiscally prudent from any rate study perspective. So in terms of the cost analysis, just a summary here. You have all the information. You can obviously look back at it, but generally speaking, anything that is above zero here represents a cost that we have to incur. Anything that's below zero is a non-rate related revenue, which are coming in to offset the system. You see it's a pretty linear line. The net rate funding need is represented as a black dotted line. That shows what our rate requirements are over the next 10 years, and the contributions to and from our reserve fund effectively smooth with those contributions what that net rate funding needs and effectively changes with the rate of inflation over the next 10 years. On the sewer side, it's a bit of a different story here, a different look and the trajectory of it, because in 2019 we had what the rate requirement was under the existing rate structure. With the rate requirement that we're looking at, with the sewer rate reduction in place, we'd obviously generate less funds from the wastewater rates itself. So you see in 2020 our net rate funding need and what's required by user rates actually drops by about $1 million. And then from that point on, we effectively continue to increase the rates to make sure that we're managing cost increases and inflationary adjustments on a go-forward basis. So kind of the important component here, what are the actual results here and the impact per typical user? So just looking at it from a pure rate perspective on the water rates under our preferred structure, two things I would like to bring to attention is the same for wastewater. So on the water side, we look at our fixed charges and variable rates in 2019, and then we have the 2020 rates that we calculated under this particular analysis under that humpback rate structure. You see that under the fixed charges, our actual rates are going down. So we go from up to 1/4 inch meter size is 2246. We're actually saying it's going to be about 1797 under this structure. Again, that's a relationship to changing the way we're recovering the cost. We're moving from 75% fixed to 60% fixed. So we're shifting more of the rates to your variable rates. Under the water consumption charge component, you see that our residential charge per cubic meter is about 66 cents per cubic meter. We're moving to your tier 1 charge about 93 cents per cubic meter. So more of a shift there in terms of the way we're recovering our costs. So we're increasing the variable rates to a higher degree to offset the fact that we're reducing our charge on the fixed component. Again, the impact on the different users is going to be quantified in the coming slides, and everyone will see a rate adjustment. But overall, on the water rates itself, there's just a cumulative shift for everyone. On the preferred structure for the wastewater rate, so you're at about $53 per month on a fixed charge. With the sewer rate reduction plus the shift in terms of our cost recovery relationship, our rate is about $34 per month for that 1 1/4 inch meter size. On the variable rate component, we're seeing about 79 cents per cubic meter, up to about 93 cents per cubic meter on the wastewater side. And then again, that would be increase in the variable rates would change relative to the tier structure, increase up to tier 3 before retreating back to a lower charge in tier 4. And that similar relationship occurs on the water side. So that's a lot of numbers to get to the point where what does that mean to some of your typical users and your residents. So what we have here is this graph effectively looks at the change in a typical bill under your current rate structure in 2019, what one would pay relative to under the calculated 2020 rate structure, what they would pay under the preferred scenario. And then it's quantified for 4 different user groups ranging from 100 cubic meters a year all the way up to 500 cubic meters a year. So under the rate structure that we have, your water rates and water and sewer combined, the actual typical resident will see a reduction on their total quantum of their bill that they're going to be paying up to kind of 250 cubic meters. You'll see a modest increase on your higher volume water users at 500 cubic meters a year of about $20 per year or 1%. And again, 2 components here and varying factors being the change in your cost recovery relationship plus the sewer rate reduction is actually bringing down the total funding need of what your end users are actually being paying under this particular rate structure. So So non-residentially, it's a little bit of a different story here. So we quantified 10 different non-residential businesses in the community with varying actual consumption patterns and what meter size they're actually on. And you see here what we're looking at is effectively the difference in terms of the total quantum of the bill as well as the difference in the bill. So the graph itself is showing percentage-wise, which I kind of looks like it didn't come out properly on, I don't know if this looks different on the file that was circulated to you, but nonetheless, it's supposed to be showing what the difference is in terms of total bill itself from 2019 to 2020 in terms of percentage. And then the actual dollars and the values on top of that is looking at what it should be in terms of the total quantum of it. So generally speaking, your non-residential customers are going to see impacts of varying ranges. Some are going to actually see decreases, while some are actually going to see increases relative to the actual volume that they consume. Most of your non-residential businesses, even your big ones, are going to be mitigated to about between 5 and 7% of an increase from 2019 to 2020 because of the change. There's going to be some select few businesses which may see some ones upwards of 10%, but there's also going to be a large number of users which are going to see no change or a decrease in the bill. And again, just in the matter of the way we're shifting the cost recovery relationship, pushing more to variable rate, and actually they're paying for what they're using, is causing a bit of shifts in terms of the total bill. And we tried to mitigate as much as we can by implementing that humpback rate structure, which, you know, to the point of most consumers are in that 5 to 7% range, which is all that different from some of the rate increases that they've been seeing historically from now. So what does that mean in terms of our total cost per typical household relative to other communities around you? So we see here the purple bar being the town of Collingwood's current rate, the orange one being what they means in terms of the calculated, and then there's the yellow bar which looks at the benchmark average. This relationship is kind of a range of municipalities across Simcoe County, Clay County, and some other specific communities, but generally speaking, your current charge on a household consuming 200 cubic meters a year is kind of right in the middle of the rate scenario, the rate pack here that we have. After we take into consideration the analysis that we've done, your typical user is actually going to again see a decrease on their total bill, so they'll actually move down a couple of spots in terms of where they are relative to other communities. That being said, you're still generally speaking in kind of the middle of the territory in terms of total quantum of household charges. So the last two slides here, one being the reserve fund, again just pointing out the minimum reserve fund balance being your purple bar, maintaining that to make sure that our green line under the preferred scenario, tracking our reserve funds, both water and wastewater combined, doesn't hit below that threshold, which it does not. So that was kind of a bit of a test for us to make sure that anything that we're proposing, the town has sufficient funds on available to carry out all their capital programs and fund their costs. So I'll leave it with this slide here in terms of the post-2020 rates, just ensuring what we've seen here is the transition from 2019 to 2020. Both the important thing is after 2020, what are the rate implications going to look like? I think the big point here is cumulatively overall between water and wastewater, we're looking at an average adjustment of around 2% per year for a typical residential user, 200 cubic meters per year. So looking at managing the rate of inflation and managing costs over that period, keeping at that 2% increase. So I'll leave it at that just in terms of next steps. I know staff are going to be bringing forward a bylaw and potentially we're going to obviously bring back a full report with our analysis as well, but we did want to get in front of you earlier rather than later to ensure that what we're going with is suitable and does meet the requirements for town council, but hopefully the bylaw does get adopted sometime in January to allow for those rates to get put into force. No, I probably went over my allotted time, but I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rebella. This is a standing committee meeting, so before I ask any members of council if they have questions or comments, I will look to the public. Is there anyone in the gallery that has any questions or comments about the presentation we just received on the water rate study? Seeing none, and I'll look around the table. Council? Councilor McLeod?
Thank you so much for that. Just a couple of points of clarification I didn't understand. On slide number 17, when you talk about your wastewater and water consumption charges and the tiers that are employed. So if a water user uses, for example, tier 3, 15 to 150 meters cubed per month, do the first 0 to 8 still get charged at tier 1, and then the second group from 8 to 15 still get charged at tier 2, and then the third, or is all three of them, or all of them go with tier 3?
That's a great question through the mayor. They would get charged as consumption goes through each of the tiers. So they would get charged from the first 8 cubic meters in tier 1, and then any consumption from 8 to 15 would get charged in tier 2, and so on and so forth.
That's what I presumed, but I just wanted to be sure. And at the final slide, you talk about how in general we're going to be going up 2% per users, but an earlier slide shows we're going to drop from about $1,200 a month for the average user to about $1,000 a month for the average user. What did I miss there that doesn't make sense to me?
So through the mayor, what we're showing in the other slides was the transition from 2019 to 2020 with the rate structure adjustment. So after 2020, starting in 2021, once the rate structure, you made those adjustments to it, it'll then increase at the rate of inflation from that particular point in time.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I have a few questions about the non-res. So in terms of the collection of the rate structures, do you have separate silos, like one, like the non-res pays for theirs and the res pays for theirs, or does it all sort of get commingled?
The costs are set for providing services to both residential and non-residential, so the revenues that come in are exactly the same. Yeah.
So then, does it mean that the reductions for the highest non-residential users, the cost of that is picked up by our residential users?
What this rate structure is actually doing is pushing more of the recovery to the non-residential sector. Because the fourth tier is actually, although there's a discounted charge per cubic meter, they're actually going to be paying more for those services than they would have in 2019.
So we're not going to see a shift to the res sector to pick
We're
up?
not providing, no, there's no shifts in that.
Okay, all right. And you gave us a chart showing the comparison with different municipalities for the res structure. Have you done one for the non-res? Because of course that's where we're competing in the marketplace for our property tax dollars.
We have not. That's not something to say that we can't look at. It's just on the non-residential side, it's very specific to certain businesses, so long as we have to make some general assumptions in terms of consumption patterns, and that's fine. But again, it's very specific in terms of what service size they're on relative to the actual chargers and the rate structure, because it's very specific on the industry side, especially big business and big water users. Their consumption patterns, it might be very different wildly from one municipality to another, or whatever. But that's something we can't look at.
Okay, thank you. And I know on the, if I understood it, your slides around the sewer rates showed we were, if I understood it, that we had sort of a surplus in our reserve fund compared to what you were recommending we needed, which was a 4% asset replacement and the 6-month stabilization revenue. Is that a significant amount, and is it available for us to transfer to other reserve funds where we're trying to build up our replacement costs, or is it sort of considered something just keep in case?
Through the mayor, it would be recommended to keep it into where the services that it was collected for. So for wastewater services should be collected and maintained within that service category. Effectively, what we're doing is those revenues that have been collected and that surplus is there is being used to, again, to offset some of those differences on a go-forward basis to the same user group. So it should be maintained within that category.
And how much is that differential, like over the time period of your study? Like, have you calculated that?
Well, the reserve fund right now is around $16 million.
And how much?
And it kind of maintains at that region. At the end of the period, you're at a similar amount. So we just don't continue to grow it. It's managed kind of within the same side.
Okay. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Jeffrey, do you have your hand up? Or Councillor Doherty?
Thank you, Worship, and through you. Given that these scenarios are promoting conservation generally, is there the possibility that the conservation would become so successful that in fact we would not achieve our reserve targets, or will they always correct for one another under this model?
That's a good question. So we've taken into consideration some offsetting reduction, and as you're moving to a more conservation-based rate model, that conservation will in fact occur. So we've made some adjustment to the analysis itself in terms of future consumption growth. But that's why we also, in addition to that, we recommend the rate studies be reviewed every 3 to 5 years. So town staff, as you move to this new regime, they got to monitor revenues and consumption trends. And if there is a significant departure from the actual analysis itself, then we would recommend kind of review and perhaps look at things a little differently. But we have taken that into consideration to some degree now.
Thank you, thank you.
See no more questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Rebel.
Great, thank you.
Next on the agenda, 5.2 compensation review presentation. We have Ms. Jane Mizanski.
Sorry. My apologies, I've got a really bad cold and it's doing something to my leg.
Would you prefer to sit down?
I'll stand, and if I fall, Melissa will capture me. I asked her to do that for me already. So.
Let us know before you fall. Insurance is a big issue here.
I'll try. It's just very bizarre.
Okay.
Anyways, and I apologize for my Lauren called voice, so I don't normally sound like this. So the compensation review, the intent of doing the review is just to give you an overview. I'm okay, I got some water here, thank you. To give you an overview of the consultant, to introduce the consultant, which is myself and one of my colleagues, outline very high level what the objectives of the project are, and the approach that we're going to take to undertake the review, and review very quickly and briefly the tools and concepts that we're going to look at. So just about Gallagher, we used to be McDowell Associates. Some people may have heard of us as that under that title, but we were in 2013 bought out by Gallagher, so we're a larger part of a larger organization. Within the Gallagher group, though, we do have extensive and diverse experience in as HR practitioners. Particularly, our focus is compensation. We have consultants, we have senior consultants and analysts with expertise in developing compensation systems, pay policies, and pay equity compliance as well. And we work in the public sector and the private sector. The consulting team is myself, I'm Jane Mizanski, and Susan Fong, my colleague. I don't do any projects without Sue Fong, she's just an exceptional person. We've been working together actually for about the last 5 years, primarily in the public sector, in the municipal sector. It is my portfolio. So we've done a number of these kinds of reviews with municipalities across Ontario and Alberta and a number of police services and school boards. So extensive experience in job evaluation systems, so not just our own proprietary tool, but we have extensive experience using a lot of other job evaluation tools. In terms of background, what's leading up to the compensation review, there was a similar type of comp review completed in 2013, where it covered off pay equity, internal equity, job evaluation, and a market review. Since that time, job evaluation has been maintained. So as jobs changed or new jobs were introduced, then they were evaluated and placed in the internal hierarchy. The salary grids, they're updated pretty regularly, typically every year based on CPI, whatever other market considerations you might have to take into consideration, including affordability. Pay equity was achieved in 2013 and it now needs to be maintained. The scope of the review will cover off about approximately 135 full-time, part-time, and seasonal non-union positions. There was a time in history where just full-time positions were included in comp reviews or pay equity analysis, but we now have been advised by the commission and just through experience that we have to include regular part-time and seasonal positions, regular seasonal. The review is also going to include a council review. This is partly a commitment that you have your compensation, your remuneration reviewed every term of council. In addition, the complication now is the loss of the 1/3 tax exemption, and so you want to make sure what have other municipalities been doing and are you competitive within that context. A little bit more on background. There are a number of recruitment challenges and efforts that are going on within the municipality, and not just this municipality. This is information that we are seeing or experience we're seeing across Ontario. Vacancies have been due to retirement for approximately 10 years. And it's expected to continue to be robust. So there has been a number of retirements over the past few years, and it doesn't look like it's going to cease at this point in time as people reach their factor for retirement. You have quite a few single incumbent positions in the organization. These present a little bit of vulnerability, so if you lose a single incumbent person and it takes you a period of time to recruit for that position, other people have to either pick up that extra work, or if it becomes difficult to recruit, you're going to have loss of meeting some operational priorities or strategic priorities. I understand that seasonal labor jobs are challenging to fill as well, just trying to compete with the private sector on that respect. And there is a little bit of salary compression that we want to test for, because recruitment and refreshing your employee group is not just looking externally, but also internally. So if your compensation system isn't providing enough incentive for people to apply, particularly if you have bargaining in a position or someone that is eligible for overtime, and you're trying to get them to promote themselves into a management position that doesn't get the same treatment, then it can be, they say that it's just not worth it. So that can be an issue. And then the last thing we want to look at is the streamlining the compensation program. Just the job description process has been a bit onerous and reliance on consulting services. So Gallagher has been providing job evaluation consulting support, and I think there's enough maturity in the organization now that once we finish the review, we can hand off the entire project. So the objectives is to review the compensation system to ensure, number one, that you're pay equity compliant, address new and changed jobs to make sure that they have been placed in the hierarchy correctly, and also to take a look at the external market to make sure that you are competitive. The municipal sector has, over the past 10 years, enjoyed relative stability across the province, but we are really seeing an uptick in that recruitment activity. So a lot of senior positions are leaving, and in some cases your line manager positions or incumbents are not ready to take on those new positions in the senior group. So it's important that you are externally competitive to attract people from across the province. We also want to make sure that you're going to use tools and methodologies that are fair, proven, tested tools and processes, and that they're simple enough to maintain ongoing compliance and maintenance, and that they produce fiscally responsible results, which is often the issue that council is most interested in. The project is definitely not about everyone getting a raise, and we are going to be having some employee information sessions, and this will be one of the key messages for them. The process that we're going to do is really building blocks. So we start with collecting current job information. If we don't collect current and up-to-date and robust job information, then the next steps that we have are going to basically be useless. So we are going to have staff update their job descriptions with their managers to make sure that they're current and robust. Once we have all of that information, the job evaluation will take place using an updated McDowell tool or Gallagher tool, and it will, the consultant, myself and Sue Bong, will evaluate all of the positions. Once we finish the job evaluation, we get an internal hierarchy established, then we'll complete some preliminary pay equity analysis to make sure that there's no obligations outstanding, and I'll review pay equity a little bit more. Then we layer in the market review. So we've got internal equity, pay equity, and take a look at how we layer in the market review. And from that, we consolidate it all and we develop some proposed job grids. Everything in the step part is job focused, it's position centric. Then on the other side, you have more employee centric information. So ongoing performance management, as jobs change, you update job evaluation or job descriptions, and your salary grid maintenance. Just as a refresher for what pay equity is not equal pay for equal work, which is I'm a planner, I'm a female, I'm sitting with a colleague, a male that's a planner, we're paid the same. That's equal pay for equal work. Pay equity addresses equal pay for work of equal value. And the way you identify equal value is through job evaluation. You come up with numeric points that says this is the relative value of this position to the organization. Pay equity requires us to compare the female jobs, predominantly female jobs, and there is definitions within the pay equity legislation that prescribes how we identify a female job, and we compare them to the male jobs to make sure that there's no gap. On the market study, we have a custom survey that we're going to do of municipal organizations. We took a look at a sample size. So we often focus on municipalities that are of similar size, i.e. the population, or we could look at budgets, similar scope of services, and similar geographic characteristics and labor market conditions. We wouldn't necessarily include the City of Toronto, City of Ottawa, City of London in your market review because they're completely different beasts. So we want to take a look at what kinds of organizations are similar to you in size and in your geographic area, because that's really who you're competing with. The council survey, we are going to develop a questionnaire, and it will address base remuneration for both mayor and council. We'll look at council sizes, because often that impacts on the dollars. We'll solicit information on per diems, and we'll also do some solicitation of information on benefits. What are your comparators doing? We also recommend whenever we're doing a council review alongside staff review is that the comparator groups are the same. Okay. So our comparator group, the one that we have now, is 10 municipalities. They're roughly of equal size. We've got a median rate of, even including Barrie in the county of Simcoe, we still have a median population size of 26,000, which isn't too far off of the town of Collingwood. They're within the geographic area, they have recreation issues, some similar types of staffing issues and services that they're providing. Key success factors, this is something that we typically promote when we're doing our job evaluation programs or responding to proposals, is we try and ensure that employees are engaged in the process. Again, speaking to the point that we want to make sure employees don't have expectations that they're going out and buying the boat before they see the results. So we want to manage those expectations. We will be having employee sessions tomorrow, and we're going to do a similar presentation where we introduce the consultants. We'll talk about some of the timelines and their participation in the process as well, which is that they're going to be working on updating their job descriptions. We will do a preliminary results. So we'll create the ladder chart of the hierarchy, the banding structure of the positions that are of similar value, and we'll share that ladder chart with employees. Again, best practices that we recommend. And then employees can kind of kick the tires and say, does this make sense? Is there a lot of radical change? So they have an opportunity to ask questions. The important part about doing this preliminary results validation early on in the process is it does have a tendency to mitigate any further pay equity complaints that might go further to the Pay Equity Commission. So it's better to get everything aired up front. Following the meetings with employees, if they do want to have a discussion about where they're sitting in the ladder chart, and we'll have some discussion. I'll sit with them. If there's any additional information that we've missed, any context that we've missed, then we may revise some of our job evaluation ratings. And then that'll be where we land. That's our final analysis. So in terms of preliminary project timelines, tomorrow is the employee launch meetings. We have set aside January, February for employees to update their job descriptions. I would say for the most part that they look pretty good. We've provided some additional commentary about things that they could consider to improve upon them. We will undertake the market review starting in January, and then preliminary results will be validated with the staff roughly in April. And then once we finalize all of those results, we will wrap everything up into a final report in May and come back to council, hopefully without a cold, to report to council with some recommendations on a pay equity compliant, internally equitable and competitive pay grade, and the results of council's presentation.
very much, Ms. Mazansky. Before I put the issue to council, is there anyone in the public in the gallery that would like to comment on the presentation? Seeing none, I will turn to council then. Council, any questions? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, through you to Jane. Just a small question. You referred to job evaluations within the pay equity structure, but I was wondering about the market study. Does that occur as well? I mean, I know demographically we may compare in terms of the people we serve, but not necessarily in the proactive projects and different things that we take, initiatives we take going forward as a municipality.
When we do the market study, we ask the comparators to provide us with job information, organization charts, their salary information, and then we'll make some job matches based on our knowledge in the sector and match them to jobs within the organization. If I'm understanding your question correctly, if you have specific projects or initiatives that are not found in other municipalities, we can't make any job matches. However, if we've evaluated a position and said it's internally equitable to be in band 10, and we find job matches for other positions in band 10, then we can say it's reasonable to assume for these skills, knowledge, and accountabilities that this job has, then they'll be market competitive.
I just wanted to make sure through you, Mayor Saunderson, that we were still able to compare apples with apples within that market study portion as well. And then my other observation was, according to the treasurer, the meal per diem hasn't been changed since 2009. Maybe it didn't come up in 2013, or maybe it means it was way too high in 2009. So I just wanted to make sure that that was going to be included in those per diems.
Any other questions, Councillor Hanlon?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I hadn't realized how comprehensive a job this was. It's very comprehensive. Looks great. I have a sort of a big policy question, and it has to do with council. And a number of years ago, I was chairing a committee for Clearview, and one of the things we sort of carefully looked at was council compensation. So it's been on my mind since then, because they had the list of a couple other municipalities. Now this is my first term on council. And it's really, my question is, has anyone, of your ilk looked at the change in the role of council, as I see it anyway, over the last, I don't know, at least 10 years? Because I know almost all of our comparators, or maybe all of them, everyone's part-time. And it's really struck me, this isn't a part-time job. And because of my background, I read probably faster than a lot of people without my background. I understand what I'm reading. And I'm doing it pretty much full-time, and I can't keep up. So, and the other thing that's on my mind is the downloading of responsibilities from the province to municipalities over the years has been unbelievable. So the things this council now deals with every week are things that no one would have ever dreamt they'd be dealing with on a part-time basis, 15 years ago. So I just, sort of, as I say, it's just a big policy question. I'm wondering if you've thought about it at all.
Typically, the council are part-time across the province in the studies that we've completed. But it is a concern, and it's something that's expressed by other councils as well, is that I can't complete everything that I'm expected to do in the time frame. All that does to us as compensation consultants is reinforce that you have to pay competitively, because otherwise you're going to say it's thank you, I've done my due service, but I'm not here working for free. Other than that, it's not something that we've looked at in a structural or a policy way where we would say or make a recommendation that they should be full-time. I think that's a decision that has to come from council. Some things that might consider in that respect would be we'll gather information on the number of members of council, and then what's the total budget, and is it possible to maybe reduce the number of council members and stay within the budget and make them full-time? So things like that could be considered, or hire more part-time. One of the other statistics that we do look at is taxpayers served per council member as an indicator.
I just have one more question that's related to this one. I noticed in the City of Toronto, when the provincial government had the council there, what council ended up doing to be able to cope is they doubled their staff. We don't have staff. I mean, we share one person with the mayor. Do councillors in other municipalities have staff to help them? Thank you.
Not typically. The mayor may have shared services or shared support from the staff group, but not a dedicated support person. Not that I've seen. Large municipalities like the City of Toronto, yes. But the smaller ones, no. We haven't migrated to that point yet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Brown.
Just one clarification, please, on a term that you used on slide 5, single incumbent position. I'm not familiar with that term. What does it mean?
So if you have a manager of public works and there's only one person. So if that person leaves or is recruited elsewhere or retires, then you only have potentially some peer people to help support, or the supervisor, the director, typically they report to a director, or you're asking the subordinate staff to pick up the slack while you're trying to recruit for that position. So that's why single incumbent tend to be offer a little bit of vulnerability. Also, if it's a particularly competitive position or highly technical and very difficult to recruit. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mazzanti.
All right.
We look forward to hearing the outcome, and hopefully your cold will be gone
I
long
hope
before
so. I
June.
hope so. My wobbly day. Thank you. All right. Oh, I can walk.
Next, 5.3, Asset Management Plan Update Presentation. We have Dennis Sloan, Manager of Budgets and Financial Planning. Dennis, welcome.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, and Council staff. So this presentation is to update you on our asset management program. So in 2014, Collingwood adopted its first official asset management plan. It was done by an outside consulting firm, Watson & Watson, so it was a good first indicator of the state of our assets and those liabilities that went along with that. That said, it was a giant Excel model, and it's hard to keep up to date in that format. So in 2016, town staff initiated a project to update our asset management plan in a software called WorkTech. So this is a software that's integrated with our other town software systems, namely our GIS system and our financials system, GP Diamond, as well as the operational processes that in the departments that go along with that. So the idea is we have one set of master data. It's primarily in GIS. It stays live and up to date. It's multi-use. For instance, you leverage it for work orders, that sort of thing. And lastly, it's managed entirely by town staff, or primarily by town staff. So where are we at? What's the status? So our core linear assets, we've completed roads, sanitary sewer, water distribution, and bridges. We still need to do storm sewers, water, or our treatment plants, basically, manholes, traffic signals, and streetlights. With our non-core assets, we've completed our fleet, and we need to do our facilities and parks. You'll notice in our 2020 budget, we have a facility condition assessment for all facilities throughout the town of Collingwood. So some things will be completed sooner than other, but we'd like to have everything done by the end of 2020. So results, this table is just a few of the details on our statistics. So we have the 5 different asset classes we've completed so far, 4,000 records, and replacement cost of $390 million so far. And this is our roads life cycle graph, looking at 50 years. So the dotted line is the average investment requirement for our roads class. The jagged line is the actual replacement requirements. So in dollars. So the average, the dotted line is just under $2 million a year. In years when you're spending less than $2 million, you'd want to put money into reserve funds. And on years where you're spending more, you'd be drawing from those reserve funds. So $1.8 million a year is what we, on average, should expect. We find this correlates nicely with our 10-year capital budget spend for roads. In terms of funding, so our life cycle fund currently provides $950,000 in funding every year. That would suggest a shortfall of almost $1 million a year. We have been very successful in the last 4 or 5 years in terms of getting grants to supplement that gap. So this is the life cycle graph for sanitary, looking at 75 years. So the average, the dotted line there, just under $1 million. Next graph, please. $861,000 a year on average over 75 years. So our 10-year capital budget has an average spend of about $1.3 million, but that's looking at 10 years. We could be looking at some catch-up, replacing some older assets in that time frame. So the current funding of our wastewater reserve fund is about $2 million a year right now. About 45% of that, though, is for our treatment plant. Water distribution, our dotted line is just over $1 million a year. Next graph, please. So $1.3 million a year, and that represents the average for 75 years. Our 10-year capital budget, $12.1 million, or 1.2 on average a year. So the water reserve fund, similarly to the sewer, is $2 million a year. However, about 80% of that is required for water distribution and only 20% for the water treatment plant. Bridges, so the town of Collingwood has 21 bridges and culverts. The asset management plan foresees $8.6 million in remediation work over the next 10 years, so on average $860,000. Our 10-year capital budget, we have the 3 major projects in the 10-year capital budget, $5.7 million in total. Next graph, please. However, these are funded primarily based on grant applications. So as we, the bridges draws from the same reserve fund as the roads reserve, and it's not sufficient to fund both asset classes, so we're relying primarily on grants. This is our fleet life cycle graph. We're looking at 10 years here. Average investment requirement just under $1.5 million. We have 133 vehicles in our WorkTech fleet management system. Next slide, please. So the funding, Public Works has a reserve fund that puts aside about $450,000 a year for their vehicles. There's another $200,000 a year that comes out of our capital lifecycle reserve fund. So there's potentially a shortfall there of $750,000 a year. Now that said, our transit fleet has been successful in receiving grant applications over the last few years to supplement that gap. So in conclusion, an initial indication is that our internal funding with our life cycle reserve is not sufficient. This correlates with the findings we had in 2014. In 2014, they suggested we could have a gap as large as $9 million a year. So when we're done all the other asset classes, we'll see if we're close to that still or not. Now that said, as you've already heard from Andrew, our water and wastewater reserve funds are proving to be sufficient. In fact, our latest rate study will reduce funding to those reserve funds. Lastly, Collingwood has been successful with our grant funding in the past to supplement the gap. We'll continue to pursue those opportunities. And then in general, asset management planning, it's not an exercise in perfection. It's an ever-evolving, continual refinement process. So in combination with our long-term capital budget, our asset management plan is the other major component of the town's strategic financial plan. And the strategic financial plan is one of the town's best tools for ensuring ongoing financial sustainability. Did I answer any questions?
Thank you, Dennis. Before I put the questions to council or comments, we'll look to the public. Is there anyone in the gallery that would like to comment on the report we just heard? Seeing none. Council, questions or comments? Councilor McLeod?
Thank you. What impact has the 0.75% capital levy that was brought in a few years ago had on the strategic planning that you're doing regarding the financials? Or the assets, rather?
Right, yeah, through your worship. So our contribution to capital lifecycle reserve, including that levy, has been increasing since 2014 progressively. So we've been adding more and more to it every year. We try to. I think we look for opportunities where we can to increase that. It's not up to the point. It's not up to what was suggested in our 2014 asset management plan. So it's getting there, but it's not quite there.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. Two very sort of generic questions. One, just general interest, 133 vehicles. What does a vehicle constitute? Is that everything from an ice machine to a fire truck, or is it more things that are just on the road?
Oh, good question. Through your worship. It's all our rolling stock, so everything that's licensed includes all our buses, it includes all the fire vehicles. But it goes a little beyond that. It includes some of our larger equipment. Now, at this point, we don't have every little piece of equipment in the system. We have trailers, but as of right now, all the major items, all the licensed rolling stock are accounted for. So we feel like we've captured the major dollars.
So, supplemental to that, would things that are typically used by PRC for yard maintenance, or even the public works that are using sidewalk cleaners, are those licensed vehicles or those others? And would they be part of this 133?
So right now we don't have, through your worship, lawnmowers, some of the smaller items. So lawnmower, well, they can be expensive, 10,000 or so. We don't actually have those in the system yet. I don't know about sidewalk sweepers. I know like our sidewalk plows, is that what you mean? The sidewalk plows are actually expensive items and they're in the system right now. But the smaller, so we're probably 10,000 and under, we might not have in the system yet, but we'll get it all in there. Now the system, the fleet, we do work orders on our rolling stock, so that's how the system stays current and managed. So our mechanic will do inspections and keep us up to date in terms of the condition.
Separate question, just for my benefit. The graphs that you showed were all 75 years out, but that's only taking into account assets as of today. So it's not a projected asset in terms of, we know that, for example, on street X, Y, and Z, it'll have A, B, and C bridge. Those things haven't been taken into account within this plan, is that correct?
Through your worship, that is correct, you're right. So there could be some additional liability that results from that. And it would be brought into future. So that's why we wanted to have a system that stayed live and up to date. So when Public Works gets new as-built, they go to GIS and get added to the system, and then then they'll come into WorkTech and they'll become part of the model.
Seeing Councillor Hanlon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I just have a question about the roads. And I think you showed a 10-year plan where we're spending around $2 million a year, if that was correct. Does that include the development charge projects, or are these outside of the development charge projects?
Those are outside. So just looking at roads projects that are, so our 10-year capital budget is broken into growth and asset management.
I see, okay. And so my other question is, some of the roads that are used by construction vehicles for big projects that are going on, big subdivisions, Monaco and so on, they really do a job on the road system that they use regularly. Are those development charge improvements that are done when those roads have to be repaired, or are they part of your asset plan?
Through your worship, I'm sorry to understand the
The question?
development charge roads. Yeah, if you could repeat that.
Yeah, so, what's a good example? I don't know. Say here Ontario Street. It's getting a lot of use and it's deteriorating because there's nonstop trucks for both Monaco and into the Edenhook subdivision. So that road's gonna have to be upgraded probably as soon as those projects are finished. I'm just guessing.
Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, are those part of what you do, your asset replacement costs, or are those kind of projects development charge projects?
Through your worship, I'll ask the Director of Engineering and Public Works to respond to that.
Through your worship, normally development charges relates to growth-related works such as road expansion, additional lanes, that type of work that's growth-related. Normal wear and tear on a road is part of our overall budget, whether it's growth related to trucks that are driving up and down the road, or delivery trucks, or our own residents. Our assets are accounted for in our asset management plan based on normal wear and tear of the roads. So it's not anticipated that growth such as the one you described is something that would be that much of a stress on our roads, but it certainly is accounted for in terms of our matrix for our decisions in terms of our management or replacement of the assets as they deteriorate.
Okay, thank you, that's great.
All right, any other questions, Council? Seeing none, I have a few, Dennis. The asset management plan is a big part of our financial sustainability moving forward, and it's been a relatively new concept, starting around 2014. And my understanding is that what we're doing in this exercise is taking an inventory of all the assets of whatever type in our municipality that we're responsible for, and we're planning forward. A little like a condominium corporation reserve fund. We're putting money into reserve because we know we're going to have to replace the roof or some other structure down the road. And it seems to me that a big piece of that is getting the inventory accurate. And so it's not just running on assumptions when you plug in a road, it's actually examining the road and figuring out wear and tear. And we've been working on the work tech project for quite some time. Is there part of our budget process for 2020 new software being requested to assist in coordinating and giving us the granular view we need to make sure that our asset management plan is as accurate as possible moving forward in our assessment of the inventory?
Through your worship?
Just to
Through
me.
your worship. Yeah, so you're right. It's all about the inventory. So to get to this point where we are today, in fact, a lot of the work was actually GIS, Lindsay Gosnell. So to get reviewing all our layers of GIS data, making sure they're accurate, and then they come over to work tech. So it's very important. And with respect to next year, it takes a lot of work. So our IT department and water department, in fact, have requested GIS services as part of the 2020 budget as a contract sort of thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, through your worship. And I think part of this is also in response to the question the Deputy Mayor asked, which is the 75 or 50-year capital plan. I mean, that plan is also updated in a 5-year cycle, so we do a lot more detail in a 5-year basis. And using technology, I think, is going to be an important feature as we look to the future, because one of the things we're looking at is being able to create a dashboard. So at any given point in time, we can look at all of our assets, including rolling and fixed assets, and make a determination as to their state of good repair and what kind of investments we need to replenish or replace that fix or rolling stock. So I think if we get the requisite approval, in addition to being able to do a better job at making the setting aside the money required to look at life cycle cost and look at replacement costs instead of good repair, we'll also have the ability to optimize investments using GIS and other technology on a real-time basis.
And just a final question, Dennis, the Watson and Watson report in 2014, I think, identified at $9 million. We should have $9 million reserve, and we have somewhere in the neighborhood of $390 million in assets. Is that right? What would be the target number now that we should be looking at?
Through your worship, so our initial findings through the updates is those numbers aren't too far off. So if we ended up again at 9 million, we wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, there'd be inflation built into that.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. And that brings us to our last staff report, which is CC 2019-03 leasing. What is that? Executive Director, are you doing, who's doing the leasing? Are you doing that, Dennis? Sorry. Okay, Dennis, take it away.
So this staff report is in response to a request from council from last year. So we do, the town operations currently does use leasing. Primarily right now in response to short-term pressures, I will use equipment rental to do jobs where we don't want to purchase the equipment. And also office space is another spot you might lease. Obviously for the judicial inquiry, we did that. But we also use it to optimize our staff resources. So that's obtaining services where it is not cost effective for staff to manage or provide. So an example of that is our recent printer copier lease, which is more like a managed service. So it allows our IT guys to focus on their core business. So capital leasing, the town currently does not use any capital leasing. So capital leasing, it would be considered another form of debt. It would be governed by our pay-as-you-go policy. Currently, our debt that we have is in the form of debentures, which were for large infrastructure projects. So capital leases could be applicable to smaller asset classes, but not large infrastructure projects. It could provide interim relief for our capital reserves in a short-term sense. So staff is aware of the leasing option and will continue to consider it as part of our procurement process. That said, there are risks with leasing. It is allowed for under the Municipal Act. There are rules, policies, and it has to be approved by a bylaw. There's annual reporting that the treasurer must do on any capital leases. There are risks. There have been instances of leases being mismanaged in the Ontario municipal space. You'll recall the MFP scandal, I think 2001, the City of Toronto. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dennis. Again, I'll go out to the public. Anyone in the gallery want to comment on this report? None. Council, questions? Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, and through you. We don't do large leasing, but we considered doing leasing for vehicles, for small motor vehicles. Generally speaking, in private sector, as an example, when you are able to expense off your employment costs, leasing is recommended to be the most efficient way of doing that. So how does that sit in the municipal context?
Through your worship, yeah, that is an applicable asset class where it might make sense. Some of our municipal neighbors have done leasing. We have looked at it a bit, and we'll look at it some more. Yeah, we have a mechanic over in our public works yard. We've managed it internally. Our feeling is that in the long run, by managing it ourselves, we'll save money. It's cheaper if things for free. So if you're getting a managed service for a fleet, they do everything. They tell you where to take your vehicles to get repaired, and when they hit 200,000 kilometers, they come and replace it automatically. So it's a whole, it would be a different way of operating, really, and it would have operating implications, but that, I think that's gonna be looked at in more detail. We have the work tech management system, which is giving us data on our fleet costs, so we'd like to use that data and look at those options.
Good, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. This brings us to a continuation then of the meeting from last Thursday, I think, Wednesday, Thursday, on the 2020 budget. We left off after receiving all the staff reports. What was it? Oh, my apologies. So I need a mover and a seconder that council receives staff report CC 2019-03. Moved by Councillor Jeffries, seconded by Councillor Doherty. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. We had finished off last week hearing the complete overview from staff. So I will start off asking the public if there is anyone in the audience that wants to come forward and comment. I will make a distinction for the people coming forward and comment. At this point in time, we're looking for your comments about the actual budget or suggestions or concerns. If there's anyone that has an ask of council, I would ask that you go under item 7, which is public delegations. So this is an important document for us. It's our blueprint for how we're going to spend our resources over the next year, both in terms of operating dollars and capital dollars. It is driven largely by our strategic plan, and it identifies the priorities of this council. And there's a lot of cost-benefit risk analysis in there that goes into it, so it's an important decision. Matthew, you have your hand up? Come on forward, please. You start off and state your name for us, please.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, it's Matt Pretty, a resident here in the town of Collingwood. I have a prepared letter. It's not long. Is this an appropriate time to do that?
If you can give us your opinions, you've got
Sure.
a free 5-minute window.
Yeah,
so
sounds
you can
good.
fit it in that window and go ahead.
And I'll hand this to Becky after. Okay, so with regards to the budget, obviously we saw a lot of things happen in 2019. Some things, as last year was talked about, that wasn't going to see full completion. You know, some projects are cited as, you know, through like engineering department and special events, PRC. You know, things are on the budget. It may not happen always within that year, but it's still ongoing. So this is in relation to ongoing projects, requests and recommendations for this budget this year, in the hopes that we could add these in. And maybe they're already in, I don't know. Number 1, the concept of the yellow post pedestrian crosswalk installation. Great idea, great concept through the Department of Engineering. The Cameron Street School yellow post pedestrian crosswalk is a really good example. A low-tech solution. I'd like to show interest for Side Launch Way in North here Ontario Street, an unfinished construction zone that needs attention for yellow post pedestrian crosswalk. This year, please. It's an absolute disgrace. We got that stop sign in last year, this year. It's a dangerous cross area. We need to consider that with this year's budget at that location. The YMCA Central Park at Hume Street along the front of the sidewalk needs attention. There's a ton of cars. It's still unfinished. 3rd Street and Spruce Street at that intersection towards the public pool, the school. It's a mess. It's got to get cleaned up. 2nd Street and Elm Street, that's a real area that needs to be just finished a little bit more near the new social housing complex in the park. Looks amazing. That whole area has been transitioned really well with the new development. 4th Street and Hurontario Street, there's a person on the street today that said, oh yeah, that's a mess, that's a mess. 4th Street and Hurontario Street, you get people just, it's an intense area. I don't know if we could do like a lit pedestrian crosswalk or maybe just just something a little bit more. There's a lot of people cutting through in that area with the new Monaco. Again, yellow post installation. St. Marie and Ontario Street, it's doing fine. It's got that caution light, it's still in. I don't know if the department's got anything listed for that either. But the yellow post pedestrian crosswalk is an excellent idea. Thank you for adopting the crosswalk policy. Number 2, addictions management with designated smoking sections away from doorways. I don't know what it is with people to smoke in each other's faces is just dirty, dirty, dirty. Public common areas and medical educational facilities, enforcement, direction, and disposal fines and standards. Let's chase these people away from doorways. It's a public health issue. Even CGMH is guilty as well. Near their entrance and the back parking lot, near children walking to and from school along that fitness path. It's a disgrace.
Matthew,
No,
one more minute.
Okay,
Wrap it up.
I'll come back after them. Number 3, request to help stabilize the shoreline of South Georgian Bay, more concrete blocks. Installation of caution signs near the waters, high winds, high water, dangerous drop-off areas. Clean up the downtown, prevent littering and loitering, let people know of the common spaces to go to, the Adult Learning Center, the arena, which looks beautiful. Number 6, attracting new jobs to the town. Obviously, that's number 1. Number 7, cost-effective planning. Let's keep encouraging people to rent venues instead of the town taking on total control of programming. Number 8, let's have more fun as connecting as a team. Slow vehicles down. We need a traffic light at Birch Street. This is an insane little area with McDonald's, Tim's, Shoppers Drug Mart. It's a mess. We need to put a light in. Let's talk to the MTO. Let's talk to the OPP. I've got 2 more here. West Side expansion. Let's support engineering fully with the High Street, Cambridge Street, Mountain Road, 10th line. Let's get it done. Let's get these new roadways installed. CGMH. Let's push towards the funding for the new greenfield. Let's make that thing into a long-term care facility. Let's make it useful. Let's transition. Number 12, continue repaving of roads. Obviously that's of value. I hope that's in the budget. Transformation of Collingwood terminals into a tourist facility, a sailing school, and I'd like to caution council to not be pushing for drinking establishments on Harbour Road. I think that's poor judgment. We do not need intoxicated people driving up and down that road. It's a dangerous road, especially with the flooding that's occurring. It's an absolute hazard.
All right, Matt.
Thank you. That's it. That's my request. Here it is. Becky? Thank you.
You can
There
drop
you
it
go.
out.
Here it is.
Is there anyone else that would like to comment on the budget? Come on forward, please.
Hi, I'm Mary Ann Dimes, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. Y'all, thanks for listening to me. First thing I want to ask about is the yacht school, and there was $7,500 allotted for a new window, etc. area there, and it's attached to the terminal. But yet, we can't get any money or can't get anybody to put plywood up to block the broken windows in the terminal. Stop the bird poop, stop the possibility of a strong wind, the windows breaking, falling down, hitting somebody. The town, y'all are gonna be in liability if anything like that ever happens. And I think somebody should start and put aside, our committee has a bank account. I'd be willing to buy plywood myself. I'll donate it to the town of Collingwood. Get those windows covered. We need to save the Collingwood terminals. You sit there and it sits there and nothing has been done. We need to keep this. It's historic. We can't tear anything else down. Like, I mean, you know, the engineering study that you had from last year. So 2018, we can't just go by that engineering study. There's there's got to be lots more out there where they're going to give different amounts of money on what needs to be fixed, how much to move the bird poop, et cetera, and everything like that. I think that's a little bit extravagant. And our committee wishes and would really want to be able to work with the town on this terminals. And we are trying to do everything we can. Grants, Trillium funding, private companies, anything that would like to. And Deputy Mayor, your talk on October 31st about whether we knew the town was up for sale, or the terminals were up for sale at the October 31st meeting, that you were talking about, that we didn't know if anybody knew the terminals were up for sale. Well, and nobody would even come forward. Nobody would come forward because there isn't any water, there isn't any sewer, there isn't anything there going in real estate. If anybody sells real estate, if you want to sell your house, you have to fix it up.
Marianne, we've got your point, and we've got the white paper on the terminals. So are there any other items on the side of the terminals you'd like to speak to?
Well, I want you to make sure you really think about the terminals. The second one is the sidewalk issue, taking the trees out, putting a sidewalk. We've got a sidewalk on the other side. We've got a crosswalk further up. You've got two lights, bing and bing, but you need a light up top because it's very hard to see those lights. Nobody really notices it, and I think that crosswalk there, coming across and then going down the other side, we don't need another sidewalk. We don't need to tear the trees down. We just need to stop taking everything out of the town of Collingwood.
And we appreciate your input. That decision's been made. Is there anything about the 2020 budget you'd like to say?
No,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to comment on the 2020 budget?
Hi, I'm Mark Knowles, co-chair of the Trails Committee. Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Councilors. There you go. Just a quick thing, going through the budget, from what I've been able to see, it would appear as though we have a flashy new cycling plan that's come out recently. It does not, at least not visible to me, that there is any kind of significant activity going on with respect to this cycling plan in 2020. I know there's an amount in the trails budget, I think, for a cycling plan, but I just didn't see anything else, and maybe I'm just missing it. But I just want to make sure that, now that we have the cycling plan, and we do put a little bit of emphasis into this particular plan to get things started. A lot of the work that takes place in the cycling plan will be on the roads as opposed to on the trails. And I haven't seen, and like I say, maybe it's there, have not seen any real evidence of any money in the public works side or the engineering side for the roads to deal with some of the things that are required for the cycling plan, on-road bike lanes, traffic calming, things of that nature. The two lines that I saw there with respect to crossings and traffic calming, it looks as though they've been pushed out to 2021.
We'll be getting into those discussions, and I take your comments. There is some that's in the base budget. There are also some service enhancements that we'll be considering today that will go to those particular items.
Okay, I'm just identifying things, but I just couldn't see. They weren't obvious to me. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knowles. Dr. Orland.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson, and thank you to the Strategic Initiatives Committee for letting me speak this time. I'm just wanting some comments on behalf of the local climate action team whom I'm here representing. First off, I just want to say that the draft budget, although it was a little long, it was, I think, well presented. I really appreciated that it was put in the format that was actually understandable for the public and myself included, to be able to, for the first time, go through a big document like that and see what it's all about. You obviously have a big challenge ahead of you to try and sift through all the numbers and figure out what makes the most sense, and we trust that council will do its due diligence and represent the town in that regard. But it was very helpful to have that information ahead of time. And certainly our group, we looked through it, we tried to divide things up and have a look through it, and certainly the efforts, both in terms of what was done in 2019 and what's planned for 2020, were noticed in terms of climate change in particular. Things like reducing energy consumption overall, fleet electrification, some infrastructure promoting active transportation, and even some of the initiatives that have taken place at the water and the wastewater treatment plants, I think are really substantial, and they didn't go unnoticed. So thank you for that. There's certainly many more things that are in that document that we don't appreciate, and our group has noted that in going through something like that, there's a lot of things that I think it's underappreciated, the work that's done by town staff and what's been accomplished to date, and that's very very encouraging. We were also very encouraged by the comments that were made by our CAO, Mr. Amin, and all the other town staff that presented. And the general sense that I got and the others got was that sustainability is becoming an integral part of how decisions are made around here and how operations are done. And that's very promising and encouraging as well, both for the residents that live here now, the visitors that we have, and hopefully Collingwood can continue to be and become a model for other communities that are out there looking for someone else to follow in this regard. In closing, I just want to encourage Council to support the initiatives that will maintain and improve the quality of life for residents both now and in the future. Generally, we're very supportive of the budget, and we look forward to what more we can do in the future budgets as well. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dave. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak about the 2020 budget? Seeing none, then I will pass it over to the CAO to deal with item 6.1, which is the further budget review question and answer follow-up.
So thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to open up the conversation and I'll ask department heads to take turn to respond to the many questions that were raised by Council. I should begin my presentation by thanking Council for the questions. Many of the questions I thought were very insightful, and many of them also caused us to take a second look at the budget and our expenditure. And I think it is really important for us as a team to be able to get that candid feedback from elected officials, so we can try and ensure that whatever recommendations we come up with do reflect your priorities, while at the same time respect some of the good government 24th century high-performing organization we're trying to develop and build in Collingwood. I did circulate a summary of the questions that I received. My apologies, I think I missed a couple because some of the emails came in tranches, so I missed maybe one or two of the questions in that summary, but lo and behold, staff have corrected me, and we'll try and make sure that those questions are answered as well. If for any reason you didn't think your questions were answered, of course, we'd be happy to circle back and provide responses as best as we can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to address some of the general questions that were posed by members of Council, and then I'll seek any clarification that you might have. There were many policy and long-range fiscal questions that I think were posed to us, and personally I took some of that into consideration in shaping my response, and also in my own view trying to come up with some best advice for Council as it contemplates this second consideration of the budget. The questions were raised regarding the relationship between the budget and the strategic plan, and I think I want to assure Council that the basis for the preparation of the budget was the strategic plan. We understand and recognize that the strategic plan is under review, but I think the feedback we've received both from the public and from members of Council as well as our own staff is that we're looking at more of an update or a refresh rather than a significant rewrite. The only significant objectives that we seem to be leaning towards adding is to put something in there that reflects the kind of organization we want to build. Many of our staff have told us that they don't see themselves reflected in the strategic plan. The objectives that we have there are all externally focused. So if there's one thing that we're going to try and put in the strat plan, is something that reflects the nature of the kind of organization we're trying to build as a public sector organization. So there is no disconnect in my view between the strat plan and the budget. The budget in my view does reflect the broader public policy and public finance considerations that are embedded in the strat plan. But of course, if council were to include or amend the strat plan when it's adopted sometime in the new year, we'd be more than happy to provide advice or consideration for the budget at that time. Secondly, there was this question also about the asset sale proceeds and how we deal with that. That money has been set aside and has been sitting in an account, waiting the deliberations of council and the consultation that we have underway. It is my, and has been my recommendation to council that that money should not be used for operational expenses, i.e. we shouldn't be filling an operational gap with that money. I strongly recommend that money be used for what I would consider to be legacy projects or important long-term investment in our community. And the reason why I'm reluctant to recommend us funding operational needs with this funding, this is one-time funding, and if we are filling a hole with one-time funding, it might be problematic trying to fill that gap in subsequent years. So again, nothing in this budget relies on us spending that money. That money has been set aside, and we are awaiting council's deliberations on how that money should be spent. So again, I don't think that we are relying on that money to fill any budgetary gaps that we have in the 2020 budget. There was a question regarding the level of energy audit that we have done. We have done what I would describe as a tier 1 audit. We are required by the ministry to do a total demand plan, which we do when we submit to the Ontario government. I think the idea of doing a more sophisticated energy audit is a good idea and a good suggestion. And as staff, we're going to take that into consideration as part of our climate change environmental initiatives in 2020 and beyond. It's not reflected in the current budget. If it is council's will, we could move towards setting aside some funding to undertake such a review. There were some questions about whether or not we can achieve greater efficiencies between parks and recreation and public works. I think it is fair to say that that discussion has been happening for the last number of years in Collingwood, and in fact, I can say with some degree of confidence that that actually occurs today. There is sharing of equipment between public works and parks and rec. And in fact, when they are looking at asset disposal and other considerations, the relationship between public works and parks and rec is top of mind, and there is a tremendous amount of collaboration happening there. We'll continue to look at enhanced ways to promote efficiencies between parks and rec and public works to ensure that more resources are shared and that there is further collaboration in 2020 and beyond. But there is a fair level of collaboration now, not only in rolling stock, but also in how we use real estate between those two departments. There were some questions regarding the funding of the judicial inquiry. I did indicate in my opening statement to council that we have used the reserves to fund that inquiry. The reserves that we have used to a large extent has been depleted. I did make a suggestion to council that we need to make some decisions around how and to what level we repopulate those resources, because of course the reserves are there to ensure that we have funding to facilitate any emergencies that we might experience. We still haven't fully funded the judicial inquiry. The bills for October and November, and of course December, is not in, and we don't expect a report for another few months, and there is going to be some residual costs associated with that. Perhaps not as extensive as when there are public hearings, but there will be some costs associated with the preparation of the final report and the recommendations. And there is a need for us to set aside some funding in our budget to deal with that cost that will occur in 2020. There was also a question regarding what kind of process do we go through to add new staff to the organization. I did mention as well in my opening remarks to council that there is a comprehensive review that department heads, managers undertake before requests for new staff are made. We look at whether or not this work can be accomplished through other mechanisms. For example, if it's a temporary blip, and we've done this, for example, in the building department, so where we can't predict with certainty that the same amount of work will come in. What we tend to do is shift that work to a third party, so it's done through contracts rather than through full-time staff at the municipality. We also look at efficiencies that can be derived through the use of technology. There are instances where we can better utilize technology to do certain activities, and that's also part of the analysis that we do. So we look at contracting out, we look at use of technology, we look at whether or not we should bring staff in on a permanent or a temporary basis, and we also look at other parts of the organization where there might be some flexibility to reassign resources. In fact, for the last couple of years, all vacancies that occur within the organization are discussed at department heads. So that's an attempt for us to look at all vacancies across the organization as one entity, one unit. We don't do it in specific departments. And in that discussion also, we have quite a bit of a back and forth on whether or not we should go internal or external. So there's quite a bit of discussions that happen with vacancies across the organization at the senior management table on a bi-weekly basis. We have had some capital underspend in Parks and Rec and other parts of the organization, and Director Culver can speak to this when his turn comes to talk about the questions that were posed to him. This was a question, an issue I raised last year. Obviously, when these capital expenditures are made, sometimes we use our best estimate, and very often we're not able to complete the requirements as contemplated. Capital investments, as many of you know, are often quite lumpy and difficult to predict. I think we're getting better at it, and one of the things that I did speak to a few members of council on, but did not include in this budget, was I was thinking about looking at hiring a capital coordinator across the municipality. You've seen in the last year or so that staff, including myself, had to come back to council to seek adjustments to our budget. And I think if we have a capital coordinator who can provide, who can bring that expertise to the municipality, we can perhaps better able to coordinate our capital projects across the municipality. We have certain expertise in certain parts of the organization, but that expertise is not always available readily to everyone across the organization because of the nature of the work they do. So that is something we'll try and get better at, but like I said, we have had, and this is not unique to Collingwood, many municipalities often have challenges in spending their entire capital budget because of the lumpy nature of that investment, and it takes a lot longer sometimes to go through a procurement process. So there is a bit of a challenge sometimes. Rushing the project without due process could result in some challenges down the road. So we're trying to make sure that we comply with our procurement bylaws, and sometimes that process takes a bit longer than we expect. We have taken a look at a number of large capital expenditures in the budget that was in the service enhancement category. For example, we had the OPP roof, we had the Eddie Bush second phase of the sprinkler system, we have Centennial Pool, those are large investments. I have had discussions with the fire chief and discussions with department heads, and we could, if it is council will, defer those projects for at least another year without this is advice I'm getting from staff, without putting any public health and safety issues at risk. There are also a few questions regarding Stewart Road, and and our building on Stort Road, as many of you know, that building is currently leased by EPCOR. We are looking at an accommodation study, and that building is part of our accommodation study. I would encourage council not to preempt the consideration of what happens in Stort Road without the context of the larger consideration of real estate. I think that, and I've had the preliminary discussion with staff at EPCOR, I think there are some opportunities for us to collaborate with EPCOR on certain customer service and out-of-fund counter service delivery that could result in some sharing of resources. But I think those discussions are in the very, very early stages, and I would like them to mature before we make serious considerations as to what we do with that building. Of course, like I said earlier, we're obligated through a legal agreement to lease that facility to EPCOR. Councillor Hamlin did raise a number of questions regarding economic development and the retention of industry, and I think that's, I was saying to her before the meeting, I think that's an important discussion that we need to have as a community. I did speak to council last year in 2019 about the importance of looking at how we can recalibrate or rebalance our residential and commercial tax base. Part of the consideration is an over-reliance on residential taxes has put us in a situation where some could say that we have an undue burden on our residential taxpayers, but that is because of the composition of our industrial commercial tax base. For us to retain industries, I think we need to continue to look at our economic development policies and continue to advocate for many of these industries, because as many of you know, we don't have all the levers, but I think we could try and get our provincial and federal colleagues to try and support a business climate that is conducive to this investment. In fact, I think we have a water rate study coming up, and one of the considerations for council will be how we deal with the high volume, large water users and what impact the enhanced rate could have on them. I think in that particular instance, council has a number of policy considerations to mitigate that impact, but we can have that discussion when that time comes. But I think ensuring that we nurture an appropriate business climate that is conducive to industry and can attract and retain talent in this community is really fundamental to the kind of investments that we are hoping to have and bring to Collingwood. So I would encourage council to take that into consideration as we look at our budget. There were also some questions regarding cash payment for honorariums, which worried me a lot because I'll say this categorically, we don't provide any cash payment for honorariums. This municipality, we don't deal in cash, and directors don't have cash at their disposal. Checks are written by the treasurer and are signed by the treasurer and the mayor, and that is what the best practice is. We don't disperse cash as part of our budgetary regime, and when we pay honorarium, we pay it for cause that we deem to be in the public interest, and we do it based on, if not council policy, consideration of prudent fiscal management and sound accountability and transparency practices. So I will stop there. I will ask the treasurer to speak to some of those high-level comments that relate to what she has, and I'll ask the fire chief to then speak, and we'll go down the line.
Thank you. I had several questions related to where we sat with the tax roll itself. And just prior to, well, actually the budget had to be all ready and sent to the printer for the 1st of December so we could get it back in time. So there were a few days in between that I had really had some very, very close estimates as to what the CVA and the assessment values were. So when the real numbers came in the next week, it was not a significant difference.
It did show, as the CAO has mentioned, that we still have a very high reliance on the residential component of our tax base. That would be sitting currently at the 82%. We also had what's called a 3.64% true growth and 3.17 phase-in growth. So when you look at it together, it's 6.59% that the overall assessment did grow. The actual difference between the estimated numbers and the actual numbers produces an even further reduction in the tax rate itself. I was asked to provide an operating statement for Eddie Bush and all of the various expenses that were related to the various parts in the budget. So the capital budget contained $145,000 for HVAC replacement, which was $110,000, and that was funded through the life cycle replacement reserve. And there will be $35,000 for LED ice surface lighting, and that would be funded through the federal gas tax. In terms of the judicial inquiry, I did have some other questions related to that, and it was basically as the CAO has said, we will have exhausted all of our discretionary reserves and reserve funds by the end of the year. I'm not entirely certain that we will actually have the full amount available to pay that amount out. And as we were talking this morning, it did come out in the open that we have included $100,000 in the 2020 budget for phase 3 of the inquiry payments in terms of when we thought the final report would be available in February. And the discussions related to the fact that that would have been a very optimistic estimate at that time, and that we would probably see increasing that to somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million more, just to cover it, because we don't really know. I was asked several questions about the capital levy that we do have and our assessment growth. Councillor Jeffrey asked for a staff report regarding that last year, but there just wasn't the time or the staff to get there. I will tell you that in terms of where we're sitting today, we had net supplementary tax revenue of $1,107,000, and I budgeted a conservative amount of $243,000, and that left us a difference of $864,000. But again, as I say, that this year it'll be going to the judicial inquiry. I also had a question on how much the 0.75% capital levy would generate, and that amount is $262,000. And if we took the $864,000 excess in revenue, the 864 would be 3.3 times of the amount of capital levy that we would raise. And if we increased the capital levy to 1.5%, it would only increase the dollar figure by to $264,000. It's not a significant amount in there. What else? We did have several questions, and I know that this is kind of going around. Ross, up to you.
Through your worship, the CAO already mentioned this, but phase 1 of the town hall sprinkler system was identified as a high risk, high priority at the time when we looked at it. Made sense at the same time to design the system to be capable for expansion.
That time, also that to advise you, there's no legislative requirement to put sprinklers in the Eddie Bush Memorial. So the question was asked, can it be deferred? And it's my opinion, the risks of the corporation relatively low compared to the phase 1 sprinkler install in Town Hall. And that's, I think, all the questions that were directed at me.
Through your worship, Adam.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the question that was raised with us was around the parking program and the infrastructure and mobile application technology and how that would be implemented and if it was considered to be kind of contemporary solution or an outdated solution. So the answer is that the proposed new parking technology is to allow for mobile payment as well as allowing for credit card payment at the multimeter stations. In addition, individual parking meters would be replaced by multimeter parking meters that would also allow for the mobile payment and credit card payment at those locations. This is the accepted industry standard in modern parking technology. It will remove some of the infrastructure from the street, as was noted in the question from the councillor, and that addresses that. Additionally, there was a question about youth-oriented economic development programming, or youth, I guess, economic development programming that attracts youth and, I guess, more diverse intergenerational community to support local economy and vibrancy in the community. Through the recent Economic Development Action Plan, which put together various different segments from the community, there was a strong and inspired a set of commentary from participants in that exercise around trying to bring youth together and looking toward implementation-oriented actions. We expect those to flow from the Economic Development Action Plan. Similarly, in the forthcoming official plan update exercise, we expect to engage all members of the community with regard to the community vision and steps that can be taken to try to implement that community vision through town policies. Those are initiatives that are already addressing the issue, and we believe are robust and in context in terms of actual forthcoming policies with an action-oriented direction. I believe those are the two questions that were asked of me.
Thank you, Director Culver.
Thank you, Worship. First question that was asked relates to what was called the Director's Priority in the budget package. And it asked, in that Director's Priority, I stated that the completion of the year one objectives from the master plan. So the question was, can I advise where in the document the list can be found? Council will recall back in March of this year, the bulk of our presentation around the PRC master plan was implementation, and so there are two implementation lists, one for 2019 and one for 2020. I will circulate them again to council so that you have them, and I'll highlight them so you can see what was accomplished in 2019 and what is being referred to in the director's priority portion of the budget package. The next question was asked about the pre-construction phase of Fisher Field and wanting to have confirmation that the project is now out of the analysis and design phase. That is confirmed. The analysis and design are done. Now we're working on creating construction drawings and an RFP document in the event that council approves funding in 2020. The next question had to do with providing an update on total money spent to date. On Thursday I gave what I could off the top of my head, but with the question I'm able to accurately state that the 2019 budget actually was a high-level estimate, and it was created based on what was indicated in the development chart study and referencing recently completed facilities in other communities. The apportionment of $250,000 in 2019 was our attempt to ensure that the monies, some money existed in 2019 in the event we were able to undertake servicing or added or had additional unforeseen expenses in the development of that project. Of the $250,000 that was approved by council in 2019, just over $70,000 was spent on developing the RFP for architecture and analysis, including the geotechnical survey, site planning, and public consultation. And then the same question is again for Harborview Splash Pad. So again, there's no carryover from 2019, but $320,000 was appointed, or sorry, portion. And of the 320 that was approved, just over $50,000 was spent on an environmental impact study, site analysis, and site planning. The next question, I believe the question on honorariums was answered. So next question had to do with Sunset Point, and a request for a breakdown of what the $100,000 requested is for. And also an explanation of the $100,000 that was requested in the 2019 budget. So only a small portion of the funding for 2019 was spent, as we instead opted to do a further study and an interdepartmental consultation to ensure that any expenditures at Sunset Point would be effective. We were prepared to make adjustments to the park in 2020, which will include reforming the parking lots at the west washrooms, the east end, and the pavilion to create more formalization, which enables effective bylaw enforcement. And as well, we'll be repairing and adding more aesthetically pleasing barriers versus our temporary measures of this past year. A question about the trail development budget of $300,000, a request for a breakdown. $80,000 of that $300,000 is following through on the OMCC commuter cycling grant, which needs to be expended by the end of this year, or sorry, by the end of 2020. And we'll be looking to enable some of the cycling plan recommendations. The remainder is allocated for engineering and constructing a long-term solution at the Hen and Chickens Trail, which was destroyed by high water this past year. The next question had to do with the master plan, PRC master plan, and a list of high priority items that were listed in the appendices of the master plan. Cedar Park was one. We have thinned out vegetation. Playground replacement is on the rotational schedule. Nip Spooner, recommendations are cosmetic and not safety related. The playground replacement is on the rotational schedule. And the rotational schedule, I should note, is each year we attempt to replace a playground that is on the list and due for replacement. Fisher Field, most of the recommendations will be completed with the new washroom and clubhouse construction. Heritage Park, all of the recommendations in the master plan have been completed with the latest work. Sunset Point Park, a lot of the recommendations will be completed with the new playground and new washrooms at the pavilion. The Old Village or Legion Park, these are expensive recommendations and we're working towards bringing a plan to council at a future date. Harborview Park, there's a lot of recommendations that will be completed when the new park, new water park is built and the parking lots are reformed. Next question I received, the question was, where in the budget document is the money referring to the from the staff report in November regarding shoreline repairs? That amount was $300,000, $250,000 for revetment and repair work on the water's edge, and $50,000 to be spent on cleanup work following the work. The monies were allocated from the 2019 contingency reserve following a council's approval of the work. Next question is, council was told during discussions about the Elvis Festival that the event cost an average of $50,000 per year over 25 years. Not hosting it in 2020 is listed as freeing up to $69,000 that can be reallocated, and asked if we could explain the difference. So $50,000 was the estimated average of previous year's net expenses. In 2019, $60,000 was the net expense budget, and therefore represents the savings in 2020 with the removal of that festival. So staff have identified $42,000 in enhancements for 2020 separate from the $69,000 savings. I hope I answered the question regarding Fisher Field already. I can go further.
There was a question, sorry, Director, through your worship, regarding the amount of hours staff spend in Elvis and how that staff resources will be redeployed.
That is my next and last question, Your Worship. So the question was regarding Parks and Rec and where the 2,000 hours of staff time that usually dedicated to Elvis go. Where did it go? So we're not able to find the reference to the 2,000 hours. However, the savings related to staff-related efficiencies are found in a reduction of part-time staff hours devoted to special events in 2020, a reduction in full-time overtime hours that have been banked in previous years, a redirection of full-time staff hours to proposed enhancements for side lunch days, live and original, art crawl, and the creation of the new Art of Winter event. So those are my answers.
Director McDonald.
Through your worship to council, there was a few questions directed towards Public Works. Some of them have been answered previously, but a couple that still remain is there was a question with respect to other expenses and an offset, significant offset between contracted services. And what I can advise is we've made some adjustments or reallocation within this this current budget. Expenses that had previously been allocated to other expenses or sundry have now been moved to contracted services. So it's a true cost. It was contracted services, so we're now following our contracted services. There's no additional contracted services. It's a reallocation of our expenses so that we can accurately follow our contracted services component of our budget. Second question was with respect to Niagara and Huron Crosswalk, suggesting that it may be premature given the potential speed problem along Huron, Ontario. What I can advise there is there's 4 different levels of crosswalk. This particular location warrants the highest level of crosswalk, which is an actual traffic signal light. It's a red-green light. It's activated, and it'll be a light, a signal light that will provide the ultimate safety of those crossing. That's warranted based on there's 25,000 cars a day, plus it has 5 lanes of crossing that they have to do. So the specific crosswalk for this location that we're contemplating in the budget is an actual signal. Lastly, there was a question with respect to the 2-to-1 tree replacement that was previously approved by council. This is correct. It was previously approved by council, but that was only a couple of weeks ago, and the budget had been prepared in advance of that. And there was also an additional request of the deputy mayor in terms of one of the items that was deferred, the sidewalk. And so what was presented last week was those additional costs as they may be considered in terms of the 2-to-1 tree replacement as well as the sidewalk. There is a possibility of the 2-to-1 tree replacement to be utilized for the town to utilize a portion of that through the grant or the donation of trees, and that needs to be explored a little bit further before we assume that that's an acceptable process.
Thank you, Brian. Have we missed anything? Sorry, Sonia, Executive Director Skinner.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to yourself and the other members of council. There were 2 questions submitted about a project that I share with Director McDonald, which is the proposal from our staff accommodations plan for an operational hub on 10th line that would involve the 2 buildings that are there and an expansion of the bays to accommodate more of the operational type staff. Right now there's $920,000 proposed in the budget, and capital, of which almost $800 would come from tax. And upon a sober second thought, staff have looked at pulling this back to a study that would confirm the needs with our tenants and lessees as well as ourselves, and to do a detailed needs assessment and design, so we were 100% sure of what exactly we wanted to build. There is some chance we would get to that actual construction within 2020, but we don't believe we would get to $900,000 worth. There's also a proposal in this budget for $240,000 upstairs at the current Parks building on 10th line And that proposal is to create a number of offices in the currently unused space. And the question is whether this would preclude using the space better after the final design is completed for that operational hub on the 10th line. And we don't believe it will preclude that work. What we're going to do is design some offices in there, purchase appropriate modular furniture and dividers that we will be able to adjust. And this will help us to not need to lease additional space and instead invest in assets that we can reuse for ourselves. So we're hoping for a good joint vision of that space before the end of the year. Moving on to the next question, there was a question that was actually posed to Clerk Services, but I will answer it, about customer service software. We had proposed in the 2019 budget, and it was approved as a service enhancement for $87,000 of software. That was delayed due to my position being proposed and filled, so it's now on the fast track. We've taken a good look at the suite of software available and have put a new cost in, a reduced cost, I'm pleased to say, on page 53 and 59 of the budget of $41,000, which was a proposal for this year going forward in 2020. I also had a question about a proposed contract position simply for 2020 for the communications file. It's for $22,500. It's meant to represent an approximate half-time technician, not necessarily someone who worked for us, although that is an option. It could also be a consulting assignment. This role would fit within our communication officer's job description. The proposal is related to one of capacity. This is a year when 2020, when we would like to do a transformation of our communications approach, to become more proactive and to try some new things to better engage and continue to better engage with the community. And it's meant to represent a one-time chance to take some routine work from our current communication officer's plate. I also had a request for a breakdown of the funding spent on the Collingwood terminals. This was the funding that totaled $135,000. It was related to the immediate priority, safety and maintenance work that the engineering consultant about a year ago, just over a year ago, had proposed to council. Quite a bit of this work is underway. However, not a lot of money was spent in 2019. We're going to total out at the end of the year at about $20,000, and that work represents about $5,000 on restricting access, about $10,000 to provide a second means of egress from the basement, which is nearing completion, and about $5,000 of a $35,000 project to complete a detailed assessment of the windows to identify those at risk of short-term failure. I will point out a few of the windows have been difficult to deal with because they're many tens of feet off the ground, so it's a challenging piece. There's work coming up in 2020 for a fall arrest system, some stairs, platforms, and guards, which totals out at about $90,000, with the remainder would be scheduled of the $135,000 in a subsequent year. I was also asked in the Fleet and Facilities budget about $114,400 cost that's noted as furniture and cabling. And this is an accommodation cost that's meant to help us with our removing of staff back into the town hall. So there's two components to this cost. Part is to the rent for the part year for the upstairs office we've been leasing at Shepherd Court. And the rest is for cabling and provision of access to the re-architected office in the town hall. Depending on the scope of the work as it's finally designed, this may or may not come in at the full 114, but if it is not, we would be transparent in that change. Finally, there was a quick question about IT. We have about 2,000 help request tickets. It is an internal staff cost. We have some excellent staff who deal with those tickets, and those are really all about keeping business moving every day in our electronic world, where we seek efficiencies and leveraging of time through IT systems. And finally, there was a question about the minutes of the IT steering committee. The first report back to the Corporate and Community Services Committee is scheduled to come in early February, so we'll bring the current minutes to that committee, and if there's a pressing need for them earlier, we can talk with the clerk's office about procedure on that one, but they're quite straightforward getting the committee started. Thank you.
Thank you. Sonia?
Mine were nearly not as in-depth as those ones, but anyway. I had two questions, besides the one that Director Skinner had already answered. The one was, due to the judicial inquiry hearings, clerk services not been able to officiate weddings at the town hall, and what the loss of revenue was. So we had 23 Fridays impacted by the judicial inquiry. We did, however, offer off-site weddings when it was appropriate to do so. The finance department doesn't track this revenue separately, so just an estimate, if we had 23 services provided on a Friday at $225 each, we'd be looking at a lost revenue of approximately $5,000. For the next question, do we charge for our commissioner services? Yes, we do. This is a fee in our fee and service charges bylaw. It's $15 per visit. However, we do not charge for out-of-country pension affidavits or affidavits requiring OSAP. This number also doesn't include any commissions that are built into our current applications, such as taxi licensing or planning applications.
Have there, council, has anyone's questions been missed? And if so, just raise them with us. If there's follow-up questions from the answers you received today, I'm going to ask you that you, in the interest of time, because this meeting has to end around 3:30, follow up directly with the staff member. Where we are now in the process, I believe, Marjorie, is that you were going to give us overall numbers about where we are in the budget process so far. And I think then that what I'll do is open the floor to deputations, because there may be some asks that I don't want to miss, and then I think we're going to have to arrange for another SIC meeting at which we will start to drill down through council. So with that said, I haven't heard anyone who feels their questions have been missed. Councillor McLeod.
To Executive Director Skinner, through you, Your Worship, I had a question regarding the $10,000 that we had allocated earlier this year towards an exploration of what's underneath the terminals. I failed to find it in the book, but I don't know whether I looked in the wrong place.
Director.
Through you, Your Worship. It is in the book. It's under the master capital list, which is right at the beginning of the book. There should be terminals about either $20,000 or $30,000. I'm sorry, I would need to look.
And through you, Your Worship, that's included and that's part of it?
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So seeing no other questions, then I will ask Marjorie if you can take us through the analysis of where we are for the implications of the budget so far.
Through you, Your Worship, since we haven't really drilled down and made any significant changes to the numbers that are here, I can tell you that right now, with the corrected amount of assessment, I've updated that already. It would be still a $32 decrease in taxes. However, as I mentioned earlier, if we were to add in an increase in the amount of funding for the judicial inquiry, and I don't know which amount would be right, to bring it to $500,000 or to bring it to $1 million. If we were to add in $500,000, it would be virtual break even on the taxes. It would bring it into a debit position and cost the average residential taxpayer 91 cents.
Okay. Thank you for that, Marjorie. Any questions from council? Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, through you, your worship, to the treasurer. So when you said at this point we're sitting at $32 reduction for the average assessed house, that is before we do any of the service enhancements that have been discussed in that extra handout?
That would be correct, and it would also not include the additional funding that the CAO and I have discussed maybe necessary.
Regarding the JI. And that also does not include the 0.75% capital levy?
No, through you, your worship, no, it doesn't. And the capital levy is about $17.72 for the average residence. And just another little piece of information. $345,000 is approximately a 1% increase in taxes. 345.
Thank you. And I guess it also wouldn't include any of the potential deferrals or takeouts that we discussed in terms of the capital projects.
No, your worship, it wouldn't. It's sitting just
where it was. So I think that's probably a good place to leave the discussions, and then we'll push forward at our next SIC meeting, which hopefully needs to be this week. So.
Through your worship, I'd like to talk to you offline with that, because we have a 96-hour notice requirement now, which would push us into next week. So you could potentially call special meeting.
Okay, call special meeting. We'll deal with that and we'll let everyone know. So that brings us to public delegations. And I had mentioned earlier that there was anyone in the audience who wanted to make an ask of the budget for 2020 budget. This is your opportunity. Is there anyone who wants to make an ask? Okay, seeing none. Matt, is this, what's this on?
I'd like to ask a question regarding the splash pad.
All right, come on up.
General question, PRC. The washrooms that we're using through Mayor Saunderson to Director Culver. I'd like to know about the bathrooms in the parks are really important, especially in the Harbourview Park. Like the bathrooms that you have on Birch are really valuable. And the one that's by the path near the bridge, near Tim Hortons and McDonald's, is also valuable. Are you planning to put a bathroom in at the splash pad with like picnic tables and things? Is that part of the design with this 2020 project?
Is that something you're able to answer off the cuff, or do you want to take this?
Your worship, yes, we are including a washroom facility and an outdoor change facility as part of that project.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. That's good. That's good. That'll look nice. That's excellent. May I have one more, please?
It's your last one. You got 30 seconds, man.
This is through you to Director McDonald. Director McDonald, is it possible to put these yellow posts in at Side Launch Way and North Hurontario Street? Is that a potential, such as the similar at Cameron Street? Is that a possibility for streamlining people crossing? Because still it is a construction area. Would that interest you to make a study, of course, with traffic and pedestrian use? Potentially try and install yellow posts in the 2020 project list.
And you know, Matt, that this is absolutely the last question.
That's fine. You can cut me off.
Director McDonald's never going to answer.
Oh, that's fine. That's
Friday,
okay.
So you're sending him
Take
out on a
control.
hideout. He's going to carry this with him forever.
That's okay.
Director McDonald?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. It's my pleasure to go out on this high note. In our 2020 budget proposal, we have a number of items. One is traffic calming, and the second is doing some traffic counts or pedestrian counts in a number of locations where we'll be looking at the addition of additional sidewalk or stumbling for my words on this last one. We will be looking at crosswalks. So it's been suggested that there are a number of locations where crosswalks can be or could possibly be implemented, and we have a number that we're going to be doing. We'll make note of this particular location. I'm not sure if it's something that we would think is warranted, but we will be looking at a number of trail crossings where the possibility of a crosswalk.
Thank you, thank you. We do, I think we just have to realize the amount of people coming through this town. It's extraordinary. Like, there are so many persons visiting and passing through that it's just the mix of construction with people feeling safe to go and explore. We really need to invite and host it and maintain it. And I saw that on the budget, the studies. Thank you very much. I think everyone's doing a wonderful job. Carry on. 2020 is going to be great, and I look forward to reading more about this.
Thank you, Matt. And unless there's any other comments? Mr. Pryor?
Mayor Saunderson, Tim Pryor, 75 George Mann Drive. A couple of weeks ago, I made a request of this committee. I wondered if I could get a status update on that.
Can you refresh my memory on the request?
To be allowed to look at the closing book on those.
I think we've probably been referred that to our legal counsel, so I don't think I have an update for you today, but we certainly have your request and we're looking into it.
Any idea on timetable then?
Well, we'll follow up, I guess is the best I can say. We haven't heard back yet, so we will follow up.
I actually have an official Freedom of Information request form that I filled out, so I'll just leave it here with my signed form for the clerk to take. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing none, I'll look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Jeffrey, you never disappoint. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously, and we made it with